We have a lot to cover in today's video, including the latest trade talk around Marc-Andre Fleury, the Vancouver Canucks, and Brock Boeser. Plus, we have several updates on defensemen that are likely to go ahead of the deadline, including John Klingberg of the Dallas Stars. We have another waiver claim today. The Montreal Canadiens have hired Vincent Lecavalier, and we have more information as well, including an update on the Brad Marchand suspension. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to talk about here today. Let's start off with the news from the NHL waiver wire. We have yet another claim. Adam Brooks gets to continue his carousel of teams he's been playing for. Of course, he was claimed by the Maple Leafs and immediately put back on waivers trying to get him to their American Hockey League team affiliate. Now he's been claimed by the Winnipeg Jets. Of course, Winnipeg will be obligated to keep him on their NHL roster, or of course, he'll need waivers yet again, which I certainly hope for his sake does not happen and he gets a chance to stay and play for a little while. He already started the year in Toronto, worked his way through Montreal, through Vegas, back to Toronto, and now in Winnipeg. So he's been quite the journeyman this season, only appearing in a select number of hockey games. So hopefully the Jets can make good use of Brooks and leave him on their NHL roster. So, of course, that's a loss for the Maple Leafs. I know, like I said, they were hoping to keep him, but they really couldn't afford to keep him on the NHL roster. So it was kind of a calculated move that they had to try, I guess. In a way, they should have probably known, but if you don't try, you'll never know, right? So that's where that stands. New players on waivers today, including Flyers forward Connor Bunnaman, Minnesota Wild center Victor Rask, as well as Detroit Red Wings forward Jamel Smith. All three players are on waivers. We'll find out at 2 o'clock Eastern time tomorrow if any of them have been claimed. I know in the case of Bunnaman, I know he's played in some games so far this year. I believe it's 15 games, no points. Apparently, in practice today, he won a shootout contest that they were having at Flyers practice, but then was put on waivers, so that wasn't quite enough. The 15 games with no offensive results is likely enough to seal his fate to head back. And of course, in the case of Smith and Rask, not huge surprises in those regards. Rask has already been on waivers once before and not claimed, but of course now that the All-Star break is come and gone and they don't have the taxi squad anymore, there's not quite as much flexibility, so we might see a little bit more waiver wire activity. The Maple Leafs have signed a prospect. They've signed Dmitry Ovchinnikov, a fifth-round selection in the 2020 NHL draft, who had been playing over in Russia in the KHL. So he signs his 3-year entry-level contract, and I believe he will be reporting to their American Hockey League affiliate with the Marlies, but he does need to obtain a Canadian work visa first, so that'll take a little bit of time, so it won't be immediate, but it should be in the very near future when he makes the jump and can finish the season out at the American Hockey League level. Now, as I mentioned, we also have a couple other few updates here, including some suspension and fine updates. Head coach of the Predators, John Hynes, has been fined $25,000 by the NHL based on what happened at the end of the game on Tuesday night, which I wasn't really quite sure that it really justified a fine. I didn't see anything myself. They were playing the Washington Capitals. I know they lost the game 4-1. I personally didn't get to watch the game live. I only saw some highlights. I know at the end of the game, Hynes wasn't pleased with the refereeing and was kind of jawing at them a bit, but it didn't look like it was anything that over the top that justified a fine. I mean, sometimes we've seen coaches get fines before for going excessively at the referees, but I don't know, unless they just didn't get enough video of what they found in that regard. But either way, he has been fined, and $25,000, which goes to the NHL Foundation anytime money is forfeited through the NHL fine process. And of course, Brad Marchand of the Bruins, who was suspended for 6 games, of course, had filed an appeal with the help of the NHLPA. That has now been heard by Commissioner Gary Bettman, and Bettman is upholding the suspension. So there will be no reduction from him on that regard. Now, of course, Marchand himself admitted that it was a stupid thing he did when it comes to the high sticking and everything that happened against Tristan Jarry, which caused the suspension. It's largely due to the fact that he has such a prolonged history of these types of incidents in the past, which is why he got what he got. If it would have been a player with no history, it might not have been much of anything, right? But clearly, Brad Marchand has lots of history and is one of the more penalized players in NHL history. Now, obviously, he does have more recourse if he wants to try to take it. he can push it further, and they can ask for a third-party arbitrator to hear the case. Of course, by the time that happens and they get a result, the 6 games very well might be up. Like I said before, though, what happens in those scenarios, if a player appeals the suspension and is successful and the games have already been served, of course, you can't go back in time and replay the games, but he can get money back and be paid for games that he would have been able to play in had the suspension been, changed sooner. But in that case, right now, Bettman has upheld the suspension. Not sure if he's going to push it further or not. We'll have to wait and find out from Marchand in that regard. Now, of course, we also had some more news in the Montreal Canadiens organization today. They've confirmed a couple of hirings that have been rumored here for some time. I know in the last couple of days we talked about the fact that the Habs appeared to be hiring Nick Bobrov, who was former director of scouting and European scouting, I believe it was, with the New York Rangers. He has been spotted talking with Gorton and Hughes, and it was believed he was going to be working with the Canadiens, and that's been confirmed now. Apparently, he's going to be sharing the title of co-director of player personnel with Marty Lapointe. Not sure how Lapointe feels about that, but certainly Bobrov comes with the history of kind of looking after European prospects. If you look at the Rangers, they certainly took their fair share of swings at European prospects. I'm not really sure that all that many of them really worked out that great, but at the end of the day, you can look at the NHL draft as a whole and say that, given how many players make it versus how many don't. But the other big news, I guess, the more bigger name that more people will recognize is they have officially announced the hiring of Vincent Lecavalier. Of course, Lecavalier, the Quebec native, the former first overall pick in the NHL draft, who had a long career, including a Stanley Cup in Tampa, along with new Habs head coach Marty St. Louis, of course, longtime friends and teammates there with the Lightning organization. We know his title is now going to be Special Advisor to Hockey Operations. Apparently, he has been kind of doing some informal work with the Habs. I believe some video work is what he said over the past couple of weeks. But now he has the official title. It's believed to be able to remain in Tampa. He won't be required to live in Montreal, but obviously can travel once in a while as required. But from there, that's a big name who's been linked to the Habs. It seems like a really long time. Of course, being French Canadian and drawing some comparisons to the way he played and his size, stature, and just how he carries himself to the famous Jean Beliveau. It's been something that Habs fans, I think, have wanted to see for a long time since he was quite young, wanting to play for the Canadiens. Now, of course, there was a really significant trade rumor way back around 08-09 that Lecavalier was possibly being traded to the Habs by the Lightning, and he actually went on to talk about that in the media availability today, where he talked about the fact that he had, because I'm not sure, it sounded like he must have had some kind of trade protection in his contract at the time. I haven't gone back to look to see if he did, but it sounded the way he was talking that he had approved a deal to be traded to the Habs, but the deal fell apart somehow at the last minute and never came to be. I mean, of course, we can't confirm 100% what the package was, but it was believed at the time, in case you haven't heard this rumor from way, way back. And now we know, obviously, there was some truth to it coming from Lecavalier himself. But the Montreal Canadiens, of course, at that point had some high-quality, really young players that were recently drafted, and it's believed they were off on a first-round pick, along with Carey Price, PK Subban, and Max Pacioretty. Can you imagine those top three Hab prospects, what they've all come on to have solid NHL careers? Tampa would have had themselves quite the haul. It would have been a very strong team, even without Lecavalier. Of course, we don't know exactly what happened. There was some rumors as well that the league stepped in kiboshed the deal. I'm not sure if that was obviously any truth to that. We do know the Lightning ownership at the time was struggling financially, and that was a big part of the reasoning. It wasn't so much that they didn't want him there anymore. He was still very productive and all that, so it wasn't necessarily around that, but they had just drafted Stamkos. Stamkos, of course, was able to come in on an ELC, big savings and provide top line offense. So that's kind of what the rationale or the rumors were at the time. And after all that time, at least we get a little bit of a snippet of finding out what the truth sort of was. And, obviously there was something to that. And now he's finally, after all this time, with the Canadiens organization. Now on to some current trade rumors that we can talk about for today. We know there's been a lot of talk around Vancouver, Boeser and Miller especially getting most of the attention. I know we saw some more updates today from a few NHL insiders, including Frank Saravalli, who indicates that around Brock Boeser, and I've seen actually Vancouver media reported this as well. I believe it was Irfan Gaffar talking about Saravalli's report and confirming it, indicates that several teams have inquired with the Canucks on Boeser's availability and have tried to engage them in conversations around a potential trade. Boeser's camp apparently has been told at this point that they want to wait at least a few more weeks to see where the team is at before they really make decisions on players' futures and really doing any deals. So obviously we're 4 to 5 weeks from the NHL trade deadline, so that gives them plenty of time to get closer to that before they have to make any hard choices. But it said that they were also told unless they get a deal that they absolutely can't refuse ahead of time, that that would be the only way he would be moved. But there's still no chatter around a contract extension. Now, of course, there's no major rush here, given the fact that he's an RFA, but he does have a big qualifying offer coming up, which is certainly, a concern, I think, for the team when it comes to their cap space and whether or not it's justified, right? So we'll have to see what happens. But at this point, I don't think the Canucks are actively shopping Boeser, but as the team gets closer to the deadline, obviously they've played better under Boudreau, so they're going to have to be careful here, but it doesn't mean they're going to trade Miller or Boeser. But Rutherford's made it known he'd like to have some more cap flexibility, and a lot of people seem to think that because the Canucks are getting a lot of calls on Boeser, that he might be the one to go, but only time will tell. I know it was mentioned about the Devils yesterday being a prime team that's been looking into acquiring him, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen. So we'll see, but certainly a interesting situation to really keep an eye on going forward. Now, when it comes to some of the top defensemen, we know John Klingberg is a name to watch out of Dallas. Now, there are some reports recently saying that as long as Dallas is in the playoff race, they may hold off on trading him or anybody else off that roster, but I'm not really sure they're going to be able to get into the playoffs. And, as we get closer to the deadline, it might be more obvious, so we might see some trades happen after all. One team that Klingberg has been linked to as being a heavy favorite would be Carolina. Now, of course, listening to some of the reports around other rumors today between the new 32 Thoughts podcast and the latest updates from Frank Saravalli, it seems like a name that we might want to kind of consider as being available in Carolina that might satisfy Dallas to get this done would be Ethan Bear. Now, I wouldn't have said a while back that he would likely be available, but given the fact that we've seen Bear and Ian Cole both be healthy scratches at times here recently, if you look at the Canes defense, and what else they have there, as much as Ethan Bear's a good solid D, and I think they do like him, and if they were able to get Klingberg and have any chance to extend him, it kind of makes him, expendable. So, given Dallas, a much younger right shot defenseman, now is he not going to likely put up the offensive numbers that Klingberg has in the past, but still, they have a pretty solid D-core besides Klingberg, so adding Ethan Bear might be a very attractive option, especially considering they have Slavin and Pesce and Shea, and if they want to keep Tony DeAngelo, who's fitting in quite nicely there, that's also going to make a guy like Bear or Cole expendable as well. So that might be something that Dallas can take advantage of and get themselves a younger defenseman for a good price and move on from Klingberg, who's going to likely move on as a UFA anyway. So, of course, as we know, other defensemen like Ben Chiarot are certainly getting lots of attention, including from the Toronto Maple Leafs. We've seen a varying degree of reports on the Leafs' interest in Chiarot. Depending on who you ask, he's either right near the top of their list or he's a ways down. But another name, a couple names actually, keep an eye on would be Flyers defensemen Rasmus Ristolainen and Justin Braun, who both could be had for a relatively good price tag, I think, going at the deadline, and they could be kind of fly under the radar type defensemen that teams might be looking at as alternative options if they don't get guys like Chiarot and Klingberg or Jake Chychrun or any of the other bigger names that are reportedly available on the trade market here right now. Especially a guy like Braun, who's in his mid-30s, only making under $1.5 million. It's really not that difficult from a cap perspective, especially if the Flyers retain a little bit of salary. And Ristolainen, even though there is interest on Philly's part to retain him and give him a new contract to re-sign him, many believe, I guess, that Ristolainen is really intent on testing the market, and that after a lot of years of rebuilding and lack of success in Buffalo, he may not want to stick around in Philly and kind of go through that whole process all over again. So it's quite likely he tests the market, see where else he might have options to go, and evaluate his future before considering a potential return to the Flyers. So I think there's a good chance that both of these D-men are likely going to get traded. And like I said, they're not going to have as much of a cost acquisition compared to some of the other guys we're talking about. And they could be, sneaky fly under the radar type moves that are, really solid to pay off here heading into the playoffs. Now, a name to keep an eye on in Colorado as well. We know that the Habs have been linked to several names like Pavelski or Giroux or maybe a goalie, but a name that they might be willing to trade off their roster according to recent reports, as well as JT Compher. Now, I'm not sure that they're going to want to sacrifice a whole lot off that roster. They're not going to want to sacrifice much in the way of their young talent like Alex Newhook, Bowen Byram, etc. But Compher, who's 26 years old, a decent middle six guy, but somebody who I feel they could likely part with is somebody on the roster that could be had for the right price, depending on what they want to do here. Obviously, when some of these guys they're looking at adding, they're going to be more interested in probably some younger prospect pieces, but still, they're going to likely have to move something off the roster. And if they have their way, that might be the player that gets the job done. Now, when it comes to Marc-Andre Fleury, we've talked a lot before how the Capitals have tried extensively to consider getting him to waive his trade protection to go to the Capitals. We know that Fleury has basically a verbal no-trade agreement, if you will, with the Blackhawks, and they agreed not to trade him without consent. But another team to watch that's, possibly in the goalie market here is the Wild. Now, Minnesota's having a solid year. They're going to have a solid team going into the playoffs, but I know I've heard some rumblings that they may not be totally trustworthy of their whole goaltending tandem, like having Kakinen as a backup might not be, they might want some insurance there, let's just say, and a guy like Fleury would be the ultimate type of insurance, as we've seen him play, remarkably well here as of late, of course, winning the Vezina Trophy last year. So certainly very capable goaltender still. So I wouldn't completely rule that out. Of course, I don't know what Fleury's feelings would be on going to Minnesota, but another team to watch for making some acquisitions. And of course, there was some rumors on the last couple of days here about a potential return to Vegas, where Robin Lehner is hurt, needing shoulder surgery, that they want to bring in some reinforcements as well for the playoffs. But apparently it's been denied that that's something they're doing, even though Frank Seravalli was pretty adamant that he has, firm sources saying that they definitely inquired on what it might be to take a return here on Fleury. But at this point, Vegas denied it. Fleury was asked about it in an interview and said, I guess he didn't have to worry about it. I'm not sure if there would be harsh feelings there or not, but it sounds like it's definitely not happening. So keep your eye on other teams, and Minnesota could be one to watch. So let me know your thoughts in that regard, and everything else discussed here today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.